And welcome to the Dare to Live the Life of Jesus podcast with author Michael Cooke. We are really pleased to have you on talking about our challenge is today's topic. Welcome, Michael.
Thank you, Chris. And I'm going to open up by saying um, many of us misunderstand what our challenge is all about, not just as a Christian, but as a human being. Because as a human being, we're given a world, a planet to live on and make the most out of it and make choices. Now, this planet is a harsh climate, harsh world that we're in. And so we're not given a rule book or anything. So how do we make this planet work for us? And that becomes our greatest challenge, is to use our gifts and talent to make this planet work, to make it our home. And one of the things that we talk about when we say we dare to live the life of Jesus is taking that challenge, but upping the game of that challenge by saying, okay, if we're in this together, what do we got to do? What do we got to do to become successful, not financially in this planet, but successful in making this planet our home and that we have a longevity on this planet? Now, one of the things is our lifetime is 70 to 80 years, let's say upwards of 90. And during that time, every decision that we make counts, and it becomes our challenge to make decisions that will better this planet and better our future.
So talk a little bit about where do you think people fall down on understanding what it means to be successful in living on the planet?
I think we don't understand that life is temporary. We really have this conception that we're kind of invincible and that our lifespan, although we know instinctively it will come to an end, but we're not the originators of that life. And so therefore we don't value the life we've been given, and we squander it, we waste it away. We do all kinds of things with it, and we find that our time is up. But it is to use the life force that has been given to us wisely, and not just for this planet. And how we do that is living the life of Jesus if you want to extract the most out of each other and work together as a team.
One of the things you just said that really struck me is we've been given this life force, and it seems to me that one of the issues that we face is really discounting how important that is and how divine it is, really.
Yes, it is, because I've been thinking about this for a while, and I know some will disagree with the statement that life itself could not be initiated by man, or it could not be sprung from primordial ooze or dead matter without the existence of God. There is a dividing line between our faith in God and actually our scientists, and that faith in God is the acceptance that this life that we have originated beyond us, and that it just didn't spontaneously appear, because if it did spontaneously appear, so would resurrection, life after death, spontaneously appear on earth. In other words, we would be able to cheat death.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So how do we help people? What's the secret? What are the things that they should be thinking about? I actually hate to frame it up as a secret because I think it's probably a little more obvious than we give it credit for, just like recognizing that the life we've been given is divine. How do we help people to see that and to be more in tune with that?
I think if we're going to recognize that our life is divine, then we've got to go back to ask the basic question. If life originated beyond us, the planet is a few billion years old, and man has been around for just over a million years.
Mm-hmm.
If life itself originated before the planet was formed, what is the source of life? Where did it come from? And I know some scientists do say that, it came floating in on a meteorite, but where did that meteorite come from? Where did that life originated from? So I think we've got to go back and ask the fundamental question. Why is it that life is given, all planetary wide life is given. So in the end, we say God is our spiritual father because that is the source of life. But if we don't believe in God, so explain then, how did life originate?
Boy, it's such a huge one, isn't it? And I saw a video recently about all the conditions that would need to happen for life to begin, just to begin. And none of the conditions can be fulfilled spontaneously. In other words, the things that would need to happen just don't work that way scientifically. And so, I just feel like there's such a disconnect between people thinking that, it's just a simple Darwinian, evolution. And yet, when we look at it, there's nothing that can explain the beginning of life or consciousness, is there?
And no, no, there isn't, Chris. There's nothing that can explain it that we will understand, because even if I go back and look at dead inert matter, primordial ooze, and you look at the life of a person who's passed away and you touch their skin, it is like wax. And therefore, it's totally lifeless. And again, I come back to that question. If it was spontaneous in evolution, why is it that the dead never come back? Because that would be part of an evolutionary process. If evolution is the progression towards perfection, why is it we have no control over life?
So when we take on the idea of living the life of Christ, that begins to solve the dilemma, doesn't it?
It begins to solve the dilemma, because then you have to ask the basic question again. If life originated not with man, not with animals, not with plants, not with vegetables, not with anything, if life is eternal, then who is the source of that eternal life? Who gave that divine spark, or that spark, to initiate dead consciousness or dead matter to spring to life? What becomes the source of it all?
And the answer to that is, simply put, God. But how do I help people to wrap their arms around that and to really understand that, and to really feel that?
Okay, there's something we can't do, and that's where it's going to go: free will. I'm going to go back a little bit to what you're saying. How can we? And that's because in life itself, and the evolution of life itself, from that perspective, man has been given, men and women have been given free will. In other words, to choose to recognize a creator or choose not to recognize a creator, to choose to go inward and then find or feel inwardly that spark of life, the origination of life, the source of life, the communication with life. So our free will choice is the only way to do it intelligently, is to go inside us and says, you know what? I want to make sure I'm feeling the right thing. And that's where active faith comes in. We can't prove the existence of God, but we certainly can be aware of the existence of God through our choices.
And so, what are the ways that you look to go inside? Because you and I have talked prior to this about, there's a pastor that recently left his faith, and felt like he was trying, I think, to do all the right things, and yet for some reason those things didn't actually end up having him have the connection with God that he thought he should.
And here's our dilemma as human beings. We're going to make mistakes, as we discussed in the last podcast, and we're going to have to forgive ourselves, because had we dared to live the life of Jesus and focused on the Gospels of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, we would have no issues. Because in living the life of Jesus, it's actually not talking about it, but it's actually how did he live his life? How did he treat people? How did he respond to people? Where did that response take him? And yes, as a pastor or minister, we're focused on only three things. One is to connect people to God, two is to help them grow their souls, and three is to facilitate service of one another. Those three things together makes up the bulk of what a pastor does. And if we get any one of those wrong, it's not to walk away because of faith. It's to go back and realize we made a mistake because we didn't follow the original plan, as Jesus has actually lived his life. So, in Dare to Live the Life of Jesus, and in the book itself, Unpacking God for the 21st Century, we're going back to the basics. We're going back to step one, and we're going to show you how to live the life of Jesus again. It's already there, recorded, but I think we do tend to forget, Chris, that it's a simple little thing, such as just follow what Jesus did, live by his example.
And I think that there, for a lot of Christians, and I don't think it's limited to Christianity. I think for most religions, you have a lot of people that feel like if I just look like I'm doing what my God and Lord tells me I should do, that they don't connect with it, and yet living it is a whole different place to be, isn't it?
Yes, it is, because it actually takes not just an act of faith, but an act of courage that goes beyond that. It's an act of courage, as we said last time, to say no. It's an act of courage to think about, would Jesus have actually done it this way? Would he actually exclude someone from the congregation because of teenage pregnancy? Would he actually shun them because they got married or got divorced and out of wedlock? And so we got to look at, how did Jesus treat people in reality? And then it says, are we mirroring that? And I think a lot of times we're trying to coerce people or force people, or another word is to bring fear into it, that we're right and they're wrong, as opposed to saying, you know what? Jesus would treat you with love. And even if you did something which offends us all, he would treat you in love. The thief on the cross is a perfect example. The betrayal of Jesus by Judas is another example. He did wash at Judas's feet. And so, are we willing to let go of our egos and to live as Jesus?
You know what this really reminds me of, Mike, is when the current Pope came in almost immediately. I think he washed the feet of Muslim teenagers who were having a rough go, like, may have been incarcerated or something like that. And one of his first acts was to wash their feet. And it struck me as, oh my God, that is exactly what Jesus would do. Am I on the right track?
You're on the right track. Now, we got to add one more thing here: how it's done. And the whole purpose of doing any act is with total sincerity and honesty of heart. Anytime we walk that line, it must be in total sincerity and honesty of heart. Then we're actually following Jesus, because it's an inward call. It's not something we're practicing externally. It's an inward call to do that. And as long as that is the way, then we all have an example that we can actually literally see and do, and says, I feel the call to be there for you. Spontaneity, being spontaneous, is all about serving.
And I kind of wonder from the standpoint of, sometimes I think service needs to come before the honesty of heart and sincerity, and that when you start to do some of those things, for a lot of people, what's going to happen is they're going to find that by doing those things, they find something in their heart that they didn't realize was there.
It is true. Now we're going to go to the next step, because there's a lot of people out there, and there's a movement out there, random acts of kindness. But it isn't just a movement of random act of kindness. It's the compassion you feel at the time that drives you to do it. And that is what separates um, the followers from those who do it for show, because Jesus spoke out strongly against those who do things for show just to make an external show of it that they're religious or pious. When Jesus acted, he acted totally with a sincerity that could not be questioned. You know he did it spontaneously, but you know this is who he was and who he is. Um, so yes, sometimes we do act, but I think even unconsciously, we're acting because we're kind and we know kindness is in our nature.
Which is a really great point. I feel like so many people are lost on this idea of if I just look it, then I'll feel it. And yet that for some reason that doesn't tend to happen. And then what happens is, but I'm going to keep trying it and I'm going to keep, doing these acts and I don't feel it and I don't feel it. There is a place that they're not letting themselves have access to, don't you think?
Yes, it is. It's letting go of the ego. That's the place um, where actually Jesus spoke as it's called the widow's mite. And the rich came in, and the rich were giving all kinds of donations. She came with the last penny she had, and she donated it. It's not so much your generosity that people see, but it's your intention of your generosity. You may see a person that's homeless on the street, and you may say, you know what? I know you're going to spend that money on alcohol or drugs or whatever it is. But then you see another person, and you know intuitively they need a helping hand up. So you buy a cup of coffee or tea for them, you buy a sandwich for them, and that makes a difference in their world. Sometimes we have to be wise as serpent, and it does, particularly in this case. And Jesus spoke at this event too, when he did say, "Be wise as serpent, know what you're getting involved with, and know the right way to do things."
So, somebody who's listening to this, how do we help them to find that place and not misconstrue it for just a series of acts that I kind of feel it, but not really? How do we help them get to that authentic place where their acts really do create this incredible sense of, I almost think of it as a sense of well being for themselves? Is that a fair statement?
Yes, it is. It starts with becoming a community. It actually starts because an individual might go out and do a random act of kindness. But when it is community driven, it's reinforcing this is the way we ought to live. So you may have 10 people going out there doing 10 different things. But when you have those 10 people saying, you know what, we're community and we want to make a difference to this planet, we want to make a difference to our community or to our neighborhood, it makes a difference because you're not alone. And in that sense, it is better that if we want to do our random acts of kindness, we do it both individually and as a community. We do both.
And does that community always have to be through a church, Mike?
No, it does not. It does not have to be a church. Now, the one distinct advantage of being in a religious organization is that you already have a plan of action already in place. They already have these things established, but no, you do not. You can form a community group to do it, but the heart must be in the place. It's got to be in the right place, not just a community action group because they fall away. But for longevity, everybody has to be on the same page.
And so for somebody listening, how do they decide where to go to create that community? How do they begin that process from your standpoint?
Actually, Chris, it's a lot easier now than in the past because we do have social media, we do have outreach programs, we do have quite a bit of networking, and it's networking at its best. It's becoming part of a team. The concepts that we can go it alone, I think, is long dead and over with. The world is too complex for us to go alone, and the issues are too big for us to go alone. So we have to connect up with a group, um, any group at all, which has the same beliefs and same values as you do. And now, what I mean by beliefs and values, we're putting the highest beliefs and values first, the God centered beliefs and values, as opposed to just saying, you know what, I'm going to be part of a group that has 10 different values, but it has no meaning to me at all. So find somewhere that has meaning and value to you and that they're centered on the right things, the spirit and the soul.
And my sense of that is that that common thread, going back almost to the beginning of the podcast, is that there's a recognition that we all come from the same place, from the same, that we're all made of the same stuff, and that we're all interconnected. And my sense is that if that's foundational for what you're doing and trying to create a community, that's gonna drive a group of like-minded people to do some really amazing things.
Yes, it will, Chris, because going back, if you recognize that the source of life is God, and you recognize that you are sons and daughters of God, because that's the source of life. So then the follow-up is what Jesus talked about, the brotherhood of man, because it is that recognition that we've got one source of life given to us. So we're all related in spirit. And if we're all related in spirit, then we're going to look out for each other. And that's what it comes down to in the beginning, what our challenge is. That's our challenge of living on this planet, to look after each other. We are our brother's keeper, but we have to recognize first the source of life given to us and honor that source of life. And we do that by recognizing also that each of us is linked to that source of life. We're all brothers and sisters in spirit, no matter what race or color or creed you belong to. We're all one in spirit.
You know, that is a huge statement, and it is seems to be so lost on so many people, Mike. It's, and yet I think that most people, if they take the time and take a deep breath and look at it, can get there. But boy, oh boy, are we far away from that. Across religions, I'm the one true religion, and that's not the teaching of Jesus, is it?
No, it's not. And when you go back to the book Unpacking God for the 21st Century, it's going to break it down into simple format. And okay, some people might say it may be hard to understand, but the simplicity of it is living the godly life, following Jesus' pattern, and that's all we've got to do. It's as simple as looking at Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Says, how did Jesus live his life? And if we dare to live the life of Jesus, you're going to find that a lot of misunderstandings is going to go away because we're going to make the effort and we're going to put our hearts and soul into doing it. And it can happen. It will change and transform society. But again, it's not an individual thing. It's a group thing.
But it has to start with an individual, each one of us individually beginning to recognize that commonality. I mean, at some level, it is individual and that it needs to start that way, but for it to grow, then it needs to become a community. Is that what you mean?
Yes, it is an individual choice to live the life of Jesus. But then it becomes, how do I integrate that, me, myself, and I, into a community? Then it becomes our choice. So
Right.
My choice is to live the life of Jesus, but I also want to connect other people to live the life of Jesus. Then I do have a community who's willing to live the life of Jesus and do extraordinary things by doing it.
It almost seems like the daring to live the life, the daring part of it, is to go up against a whole lot of dogma that's out there that has stopped serving people long, long ago and has put us as victims of the other side at some level. Is that what daring is? Is it going against the grain of kind of common thought that's lost the underlying ideas of what it meant to live the life of Jesus?
Yes, Chris, it's exactly because in my own journey, I did that. I went back through the Bible. I threw out every single doctrine and dogma of how I grew up. And then I searched for the answers that how did Jesus actually live his life? And once I begin to throw out the doctrines and the dogmas, I come down to a pure distilled form. And again, in the book, there's one part of the book that you'll come for and you'll find out. Um, that is the search for God and the meaning of life. And and that's where we have to push the envelope. That's where we really have to begin to go beyond ourselves and to say, is this teachings right? Is this doctrine right? Is this dogma right? What do I believe? And if I let go of it, what am I losing? What am I missing? And I think what the people don't let go of is because of fear, fear of reprisal, fear to be an outcast, fear to be excommunicated, fear. And that's what's really choking us is because we want to belong to a community, but fear is keeping us from actually searching and questioning. I'm going to answer that one, and I'm going to come right back to Martin Luther,
Okay.
the original Martin Luther, with his thesis, and he's posted it on the church door. We are afraid in Christianity to challenge. Actually, most religions are afraid to challenge, and the reason we're afraid to challenge is because it's going to ask us to go a step beyond, and maybe we'll get persecuted for it, and maybe we'll get blown up for it, or cast out, or we're going to get bite back for it. And we're afraid to take it up because we don't want the criticism of being the only one or the lone wolf calling it out. And that's what I think people are afraid to question the doctrines and dogmas.
So let me just see if I've got this because I think I can tie it all together now. One of the things that defined who Jesus was his devotion to his life of not, I don't get the sense of was being a holy man, but living a life that was holy. And he understood that that was going to take a tremendous amount of courage to go against the grain of so many people. And yet anybody who spent time with him immediately felt exactly what it was that he was living. Is that right?
That is correct. That is exactly it, Chris. It is. Jesus went up against the Sanhedrin Council. He went up against the scribes and the Pharisees because they were living a life of only external rites, but inwardly they weren't living it. They weren't living the holy life inwardly. And he went up against them, and they fought back against it, and they pushed against it, and they pushed against it. But he stood for something of living an authentic life, and not the doctrines and dogmas, not the rules and regulations, not going back to tradition, but how do you actually honor God? And we honor God by serving each other.
And I also get the sense, and tell me if I'm wrong on this, but honoring God is, in my estimation of what you're saying, versus kind of the dogmatic version of it, which is, you bow at the feet of God. I get the sense that what you're saying is live in a way that celebrates God through your celebration of your spirit and of yourself being one of these beings that has that. In other words, it doesn't come without the infusion of God to give you consciousness, your soul, that sort of thing. So is that right?
Yes, it is. It is correct. And I'm going to go one step further. It's a celebration and the honoring of the life you've been given because you recognize that you're not the source of your own life. And therefore, that life is given as a gift to you. And the only way you can give that gift back and respond back in kind is to actually show love and compassion for those around you because you value that they have that same life in them, the life of God in them. So you're honoring them also. So honor each other in the highest sense because you recognize God in you and God in them.
It is so powerful, Mike, what you're talking about. And I think that what we need to do is have a podcast just on getting to forgiveness, practicing appreciation, understanding judgment and how to let it fall away. I mean, so much of what the core of the Bible teaches is that very thing. And yet, and what I hear you saying is something that's very similar and very different from what a lot of Christianity thinks it is. Is that a fair statement?
It is, and the reason why we've got to consider that, and I've heard this one, and actually psychologists will tell you the same thing. If you start a story, by the time you get down to the 10th person, the story has changed. By the time you get down to the 100th person, you won't even recognize what the story is. It's been over 2,000 years. So we forgot what the original story is all about. And that's why when we go back to the Gospels and stick to the Gospels, we come close enough to recognizing what the true story is. When we measure it, and we can statistically, I'm going to use the word statistically here, measure it internally, um, and we can prove it internally because when we're in sync with the message, we feel something in us to say, I'm confirming that message. And that's in the Bible, Jesus spoke about, I will send you the spirit of truth. And that the spirit of truth, we call it the comforter, that's the spirit of Christ in you, confirming, very much confirming that what you're going through, what you're experiencing is real and it is truthful. And we move away so far away from that internal recognition of truth and put doctrines and dogmas around it that we have to go back and feel it internally. This is the right way to do things.
Boy, oh boy. And when you get to that place, even though it may be fleeting here and there initially, but when you get to that place where you feel that spirit of truth, it is not even a question. There's no room for a question about, am I doing this right? It doesn't even come up, does it? Like when I'm
No,
right there,
it's liberating.
yeah.
We go back and look at it and says, the truth will set you free. And that is quite true. It's not a question of honesty, as many of us take truth or, for honesty, but it's spiritual truth will set you free. It's not a question of, are you an honest person or a dishonest person, or are you telling the truth today? No, that kind of truth is not what we're talking about here. It's spiritual truth. It's universal truth, which once recognized must be lived because it's inwardly recognized, and only your soul can recognize it on the inward level. And when you become conscious of it, you're going to live your life by that example.
Because it feels so good, because there's no judgment there, because there's appreciation there, because I can feel my connection to something that's so much greater than just myself.
That is correct.
Boy, that's a whole lot different than just doing things the right way, isn't it?
It is because we're asking ourselves, are we connecting to the source of life?
Yep.
And that's the individual choice. I'm going to touch on one thing here before the podcast is over on that life itself. Now, because we're given a life, and it's just a matter of making choices. Nobody says, I have to do this, because you can't be forced to follow God. You just cannot be forced or make to be following God. It's your individual choice because that's how we've evolved. God wants you to come freely of your own free choice and your decision alone.
It is so powerful. And I think we really got to the heart of it, Mike, in terms of just understanding it's that place, it's that feeling that that there's no room for question because it's so clear when I'm there. And I think people need to just keep in mind that it happens here and there. And as you grow in your faith, that those feelings become more and more common.
That is correct. And it's now the big connection, the big picture is when you have several thousand people or a million people or more out of a planet of 8 billion. When you have that level of connection across a community, across a country, we're going to start seeing society change because now we're allowing our creator to be part of our life, our creator to be helping with decisions that we're making. One of the things that I had happen this week is that I was speaking to someone and they were asking, why is it that bad things happen? Why is it that God is allowing starving in Africa? Why is it God is allowing people to have Ebola and cancer? And I had to go back and think about it. But if we're given a choice, if we're given that choice where God does not say, I'm going to interfere because you have free will, which is par absolute, God will not interfere with our choices and our decision because our free will is absolute. And He's not going to take that away. We're not robots. And therefore, every decision we make has a consequences, which is automatic. But every right decision we make has also consequences, which is positively reinforced. So it's not that God does not care, but God will not intervene because our choice, our free will choice, is whosoever will may come, and then we transform society.
Michael Cooke, you are the author of Unpacking God for the 21st Century, which can be found on Amazon. Just search for Unpacking God for the 21st Century and you'll find it there. Our topic today has been our challenge. And not only have we shown what the challenge is, but I think given people a really solid understanding of finding those feelings through acts that are heart-based and centered in the soul and the spirit really have the ability to change not only our own lives, but the lives of the communities that we create. What's the last thing you want to wrap up with for today, Michael?
Okay, the last thing I really want to wrap up with today is that I don't believe that we should be renouncing our faith or walking away from our religion when things get tough. Jesus had that same choice when he faced persecution. He had that same choice when he knew he was going to be betrayed. He had that same choice when he knew he was going to go and die at the cross. He could have walked away. He didn't chose not to walk away, but he chose to live a life by example and lead. Um, One of the things I think we misunderstand is because we walk away from religion because we misunderstand it. We walk away from Christianity because we misunderstand it. We want to go to church because the church is not helping us. But then again, daring to live the life of Jesus isn't about walking away. It's about continuing the journey and doubling down on that journey and says, you know what? I'm going to continue on. 1,000 mistakes I make, I already know God has forgiven me, but I will persist in my goal.
That's awesome. Well said. Once again, Michael Cooke, Unpacking God for the 21st Century. Check it out on Amazon. And I am looking forward to our next podcast, Mike. Oh my gosh, this is really, really powerful what you've brought to the table.
Thank you, Chris.